It's our end-of-season recap episode, a look back at the topics and highlights of our season-long coverage, and thank yous to all those that made our show extraordinary this year. The season finale of Beat the Shift is next. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and today is our end-of-season recap show. We will give you the highlights of our first season on our new feed, the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Plus, we will take the time to thank all those that made our show possible.
If you have not yet, please subscribe to our podcast feed on Apple, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your shows. And you can follow our podcast on Twitter at beat_shift_pod. One request of you, though, if you have been enjoying our show all season long, and if you have a spare minute or two, please help us by leaving a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. This will help us a lot. It will help enable the show to reach many more ears from coast to coast and around the world. Please, if you have a moment, give us that 5-star review.
And go on to RotoWare and purchase your own ATC Projections t-shirt, too.
Right, sure, do that.
Well, the Beat the Shift podcast is unlike any other baseball show out there. We focus on the strategy of playing fantasy baseball. Aside from analyzing undervalued players, each episode also focuses on gameplay topics that you can't get anywhere else. We tackle questions such as, what is an appropriate amount to spend on a closer in Fab? Which counting stat is more important to focus on early in the season? Or how about in September? How much should one discount a player for categorical risk? When is it too early to punt categories? What is the most efficient use of draft capital for starting pitchers? Questions just like this. Plus, we have the best injury analysis in the game, with fantasy spin and relevant advice from a real medical professional. I'm talking about Ruvain, of course. Ruvain is an orthopedic physician assistant who has diagnosed every sports injury you can imagine. We here at Beat the Shift are pushing for him to take over as the head of the New York Mets medical staff. But for now, you simply get tremendous injury information and advice each and every week right here on our show. Ruvain also has a weekly injury column on rotoballer.com throughout the regular season.
And of course, Ariel's resume speaks for itself. He's a 5-time FSWA finalist, winning the Baseball Writer of the Year award in 2019, and most recently, he won for the Best Baseball Article of the Year in 2020. He's the numbers guy. His day job as an actuary specializing in risk management puts him in a very unique position in our industry. If you've heard him use the terms supply and demand, return on investment, anti-correlation, or risk-adjusted pricing, well, that's just his unique way of looking at fantasy baseball, and it seems to work.
Our goal in our weekly program isn't to tell you what to do and how to manage your fantasy teams. We are here to debate the strategy concepts, and through these discussions, enable you to apply the lessons learned to your specific situation. To do this, we bring on the very best guests from around the baseball and fantasy baseball industry almost every single week.
And, in addition, we sprinkle in real baseball interviews with current and former ball players and prominent members of the media. Why did we draft Trevor Rogers in virtually all of our leagues this year? That's because Anthony Bass came on the show during spring training and told us to look out for the youngster. You can't get these kind of tips from anywhere else.
We covered our preseason episodes in our preseason recap show back in March. We want to thank Eno Saris, Ian Kahn, Tristan Cockcroft, Todd Zola, Derek Hardy, Paul Sporer, Rick Wolf, Nick Pollock, Derek Van Riper, Ryan Bloomfield, Matt Modica, Alex Fast, Stefania Bell, and Ray Murphy for coming on the show to help our listeners crush their preseason drafts.
In April, we featured Scott Pianowski, Vlad Sedler, and Glenn Colton. They helped us through the strategies of the first 2 weeks of the season, the key to waiver wire pickups, and we made some bold predictions for the 2021 season. In May, guest Steve Gardner talked us through how to set fantasy lineups, and Ian Kahn returned to the show to point out when it is too early to punt, react, and change plans during the season.
Leading up to the All-Star break, aside from our normal strategy, waiver wire, and pitcher preview segments, we invited a number of beat writers and injury guests onto the show to help us deep dive teams from all around the major leagues. We talked everything A's and Giants with Jessica Kleinschmidt of NBC Sports. The Athletic's Britt Giroli talked some Nationals and Orioles, while RotoWire's Jeff Erickson came on to discuss everything Cincinnati Reds. We had a number of fellow Fangraphs writers on the show. Former Astros executive Kevin Goldstein discussed the Astros and Rangers, while Sarah Sanchez went over the Cubbies and Brewers. Finally, we had on a number of beat writers and reporters, including Sweeney Murdy from WFAN in New York to discuss the Yankees, Steve Carney for the Rays, Jeff Fletcher of the Orange County Record to talk about the Angels, and Craig Mish of the Miami Herald to go in depth about the Marlins.
Over the summer, we had on more prominent fantasy baseball analysts, including Rob Silver, Nicholas Gaunt, Patrick Davitt, Fred Zinke, Greg Jewett, and James Anderson. We discussed a variety of topics on these shows, such as dealing with saves, trading, league engagement, self-evaluation, prospects, and much, much more. For the All-Star break, we had on a bevy of former New York Mets, catcher Devin Mesoraco, lefty specialist Jerry Blevins, and 1984 and 1986 World Series winner Howard Johnson all came on the show to discuss their careers and baseball in 2021. Of course, we also had a big fantasy roundtable discussion with the stars of the Fangraphs The Sleeper on the Bus podcast, none other than Paul Sporer and Justin Mason.
Oh, and we also had the father of sabermetrics on our show as well. Bill James himself made a guest appearance on our Beat the Shift podcast. This was one of the interviewing highlights of my career. After asking Bill what his favorite formula he ever made was, runs created, I gave him a suggestion on how to improve it using stats from my own recreational softball league, and I discovered, why don't we include errors? He told us on air that he never thought of that addition and was going to look into it. Wow, what a personal moment it was for me. And most recently, both Ian Kahn and Derek Carty returned to the program to help wrap up the season. Both shows are must-listen-to episodes, including our live event from the desert out at First Pitch, Arizona.
We also want to thank David Appelman for giving us our voice on the hallowed pages and airwaves of Fangraphs. It is truly an honor to be part of the legendary baseball analytics site. And a big thank you to Justin Mason for giving us our start as podcasters in the industry. For the first 2 years, we were the voices of the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational podcast. So thank you, Justin.
And Ruvain, you nearly won TGFBI that second year. You finished second amongst over 300 fantasy baseball analysts.
Yep, so close. And finally, we want to thank the most important part of the show, you. We would not be here if not for the thousands of listeners that tune in each and every week. Thank you for all those that sent in all the mailbag questions throughout the year, who have interacted with us on Twitter, and just those who make us a part of their regular routine on a random Friday. It is truly amazing to have such an amazing audience. Thank you so much, and please keep listening to us throughout the offseason and into next year.
That's right. We will be back here throughout the offseason with new episodes. Watch out for us in the coming weeks where we debate the best way to account for risk, how closely to follow projections, undervalued sleepers for 2022, and much, much more. So in the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter.
I'm Reuven Guy. You can continue to follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru.
And me, I'm Ariel Cohen. You can follow me on Twitter at ATCNY.
And you can follow this show at beat_shift_pod.
And thanks once again for listening to us all season long. We hope that you and your fantasy team succeeded in 2021, and we will do our very best to help you out in 2022. From all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.